50,000-foot view, but finally just worked its way in there.
Again, I supported it. And then immediately said, "Uh-oh."
I'm so nice to everyone, and you guys are so mean to me.
I do appreciate you encouraging me to be here. I feel like this is a my wish thing. And
make a wish. Is that what you meant?
I watch ESPN, and theirs is called My Wish. It's the same thing.
Look at the people rolling in.
Look,
Josh Peach.
Do you see what's coming through?
The
Ahoy
says ahoy. Rena, Valeria.
Ahoy, everybody. Love it.
Guys, I'm so sorry for the introduction you guys are about to hear this week.
I feel great about it.
Kate loved the TCB episode this week. I had Justin and Aaron on from Generation Y, live from CrimeCon.
Wait, that came out already?
Came out today.
Oh, it came out today. Yeah, I haven't. I rolled out of bed and started doing my job.
Started getting right after it.
Yeah.
YouTube Live. I'm sorry. I just realized that Bob's allowing me on here for Make-A-Wish purposes. I thought he really wanted me on here, but he's just helping a special child.
Well, when they hear the intro this week, they'll understand. The thing is, Kelly saves you so much. Like,
she's amazing.
Yeah, it'll be.
She saves me.
The edit of that will be just smooth. They'll never know that it took 25 minutes to do the intro.
25 is gracious.
Yeah,
this is the one time that I will back you up on that.
Oh, it's fine.
I started recording that intro at 11:15.
Yeah, a lot of people in the chat ski. And I think there's enough in there we can get
Siobhan,
started.
Welcome. Hopefully,
I'm so glad you made it, Siobhan. Right? We've been waiting for you for weeks.
Wait, do we say it right? Is it Shavon or is it Siobhan or is it something else that we didn't?
Shavon. I don't know why. You know what? No one would have questioned how I said it until you had to make a deal about it. Janet's been on.
Yes, Josh. Very bad stage plan.
Janet has been on my ass this whole morning, and this cup is for her.
Now,
I got yelled at for siding.
Do you really think I deserve that? Based with no other information, did I deserve that?
You guys only see sweet Janet. She's vicious and mean. And she's the most horrible, negative person I've ever come across. It's like podcasting with Eeyore when you're with Janet Marnie.
I feel like like when you're a little kid and your parent covers both your ears and rubs your head and yells at the other parent for yelling. That's what Janet does to me.
Your parents covered your ears? That's so nice.
Oh, well.
Nobody covered
I say that.
mine.
Well, here's the deal. My parents weren't even together. So
thank you, Nick. Nick's
way to bring that one up.
Nick is Team Bob. About time somebody. And then Hannah with the callback, it's supposed to say gobble a bag of doinks.
Hannah knows. I said that right. I said it right before we. What did I say it before we were live streaming?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, that's it.
The first time I showed you the cup.
Yep.
Amanda likes your shirt.
I mean, listen, I was like, what am I going to wear today? And then I thought, maybe I don't ever have to wonder what I'm going to wear again until they test the evidence. Maybe I can just wear this for every single follow-up. Single follow-up. Let's not push it to every single day. Right. Every single follow-up.
Every week, and then and wash it every once in a while, maybe.
Oh,
I wore a pink shirt today. I thought that was appropriate.
Zach is wearing his camera. I don't want to touch his phone because he'll mess it up. But he's wearing this very nice button-up shirt and gym shorts.
I am totally wearing gym shorts.
Yeah. You're the one who posts on your social media that you don't have to wear pants. So
yeah, I did that the other day. I had to do an interview for some Arkansas news station about the Westminster case, and they're like, "Oh, it's gonna be on video on Zoom." I'm like, oh shit! So I just ran and grabbed a collared shirt and threw it on, and I'm still wearing my gym shorts.
Yeah.
In my defense, I didn't wear this to be fancy. I wore it because it was comfortable. It's really lightweight.
So that was a fashion choice. It wasn't like you were trying to deceive anyone.
No, I wore this because it was comfortable.
It's a very handsome shirt.
What you got going on there?
Who's on there?
They are turtles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
that's a nice shirt.
That's a good eye right there. That got turtles from. This is how big they seem to me.
On these little blotches, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cute.
All right, I think we should start the show.
See that Sarah just likes to tune in to see what my name is.
What is it? Oh yeah, Emotional Bob this week.
I can cry this week if you want me to.
Yeah, he cried because he caught the biggest fish
Listen, I don't know why you have to embarrass me
in front of all the other boats.
Crying.
It was so embarrassing.
I was excited.
I had to yell at him and tell him to stop crying.
That's a really good fishing story. For those of you who are on Patreon, rest assured there was a very fun fishing story that got told, and I'm not a fisher person. See how PC that was? But I love that story. It genuinely also made me want to go out and be in that particular spot where you're fishing.
Well, come visit us. Someday you should just come visit.
I want to.
I will just
I'm telling you, I'm going to come and learn how to survive because
there you go. We'll switch out axles on boat trailers and
catch
we'll
tiny
build some
birds
shit.
Who were running around.
Catch tiny birds. We'll run an
garages.
excavator out back and line a pond that we dug ourselves.
It's gonna be great.
I don't want to do that again.
Yeah. All right, here we go. Doesn't cry. Shut up,
exactly, Sarah. Exactly.
I only cry when I'm on TV. Every time I'm on TV. I get so much. My problem is when something's really emotional, like I'm really good at like bottling it up, but I can't talk about it. I can't. And they put a camera in my face, and then they're like, "We need you to talk about what just happened." I'm like, "Yeah, well, what just happened was I feel all these emotions."
Yes. We've heard that happen on the podcast a time or two, my friend. Not just TV.
Yep.
It's true.
Yep. But there was a camera in my face.
There's always something
real
going on.
Trees instead of for cloth forests. Yeah.
How do you know
Teresa
she's not
knows? I got to get out into the real thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Come visit. Next time you're going to be in Chicago, we're just right around the lake. I'm going to Chicago tomorrow.
Did you hear the quail? I heard your little quail. I just heard your little quail.
When I went to the bathroom earlier, I was looking for it. He answers me. I did a call. I went out and was like, and I hear. Yeah. It's adorable.
I love this.
Oh. Janet, do you want to hear how much
I'm
Bob
kind
hates
of just
my
imagining
wife?
Woodstocks, even though a bunch of little Woodstocks flittering around, even though I've seen I've seen the quail and they're just as cute. So I don't, but
right.
Woodstock keeps popping in my head. What were you saying, Zach?
That I just want to tell you how much Bob hates my wife. That he literally planned a trip on her birthday, so he wouldn't be here to celebrate her birthday.
I'm sorry, Michelle.
I know.
Yeah, it's a bummer. I felt bad. So they're doing a dinner.
I just want to throw Bob under the bus for once.
Michelle knows that we are the two adults in the relationships,
and she knew.
And so I knew she would respect my choice because we're leaving at 5 a.m.
No, so
on
Saturday. She's not watching. So thanks a lot for that
for our family vacation. And
thanks a lot for ruining a surprise dinner.
Well, she's not on the Patreon
that we know. No. This isn't Patreon. This is YouTube Live.
Oh yeah. Is it a surprise?
It was.
Surprise.
Oh.
I don't know if she's on or not. She won't comment.
Well, you shouldn't have brought it up, motherfucker.
Good point.
Stop fighting! Someone put their hands over my ears, quick! Rub my head.
No, you're the one that protects me. That's what I was saying. You yell at Bob.
There may or may not be a surprise dinner going on but we're leaving at 5 a.m. with all the kids to go on vacation Saturday. And I was like, yeah, we'll go. And then I was like, it seems like too much to go be out till 11 o'clock at night that night before we leave and get the house ready for a house sitter. So I had to decline, which is too bad because last year I got a bunch of women to sing happy birthday to her at
that's true. You did do that
at a hibachi place.
Yeah,
you did do that.
So that gets me 2 years worth.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Can we do this?
Yeah.
Kelly, I'm so sorry.
Listen, Kelly didn't have to listen to any of that shit between the clicks. That's on her. Her choice to listen.
I
was apologizing for the shit before the clicks.
Funny stuff is what happens between the clicks, and she knows.
My head I got a haircut yesterday. My head
Ahoy, friends!
Nick did just remind you. It is most certainly not on vacation. It is on assignment.
On assignment.
Thank you, Nick.
Here we go. Alrighty, for those of you that just heard that stellar intro from the one and only Zach Weaver, you should know that was a real labor of love. It took Zach 26 minutes to get that intro out, and I think the final product is great. Kelly came out really good.
Kelly always helps me out. Sometimes I get giggling and I can't help myself.
It was but if you notice Zach giggling at the end of that, that's why it didn't actually take 90 seconds to do that intro. It took a little longer than that. But thank you all for joining us. And I'm here, obviously, in the studios, and Janet is here via Zoom. Get a little housekeeping before we get going with all of the questions for this week's episode. So first of all, this next week, so you're hearing this Friday, on Sunday, and the follow-up next week, you're not going to hear Truth and Justice. Instead, you're going to hear
Truth and
Just Us.
That's right.
A little
Truth
too long to come up with
Just
that.
Us.
I was just gonna wait to see if she started. So
yeah, let's make that a little cleaner for Kelly. So pretend I just said. Instead, you're going to hear
Truth
and Just Us.
That's right. I am going to be on assignment next week. I'm leaving for my assignment on Saturday morning, and I won't be getting back to the following Friday. Was scheduled to be just a week off, but Jack and Zanet. Jack
That's
and
so
Zanet.
much better than Janet and Zap. Jack and Zanet is great.
It's solid, yeah.
This is going to be a horrible follow-up.
They were actually super excited about me being on assignment this week, and have decided that they're going to do both episodes completely a la mode Bob.
I think you mean Sans Bob.
Sans Bob. Yes. Yeah. So without me, I have nothing to do with this. So Janet, as you guys may or may not know, is good friends with Dr. Shiloh from the LA Not So Confidential podcast. And many of you were saying you wanted Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott to come on and do an analysis of Javier's interview like they did with Roberts. So Janet has taken the wheel on that and has made some schedules line up, and Janet and Zach are going to be interviewing Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott this week for this week's main episode. And the next week, as my assignment continues, they will be doing the follow-up Sans Bob next week also, because there'll be no internet on my assignment. So I won't be able to join in. So this next week is going to be Truth and Just Us, that I'm not part of the us.
Yeah, without Bob Ruff.
Yeah, without Bob Ruff. Maybe you could make a new logo for next week.
I'll try my best.
So that's all coming up. One thing you guys need to know next, I think everything we've got squared away, everything's going to be normal. On the follow-up for questions next week, be looking for a post from Zach rather than me on the fan page to submit questions for the follow-up. Also, we tried to figure out a few different ways to make it work and ultimately decided there will just not be a YouTube live next week. So for all of you that are in the YouTube live right now, they come in every week, and that audience is growing more and more every week. So we appreciate you guys all being there. Next week, there will be no YouTube live. Other than that, everything should be normal. Sans Bob.
Great. Yeah, I have to say quickly, if you have been a longtime listener of Bob's, you know that he is fastidious and that he wants to do it the way he wants to do it because he is a successful type A person. And we are both terrified and very flattered that he has decided to let us take the keys for a second. But we're really excited because everybody, I think, is going to be really interested to hear what Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh have to say. And they're professionals, so we shouldn't have to do too much. I think they're going to save the podcast while you're on assignment.
I'm glad you said it because I have to agree with you.
I have full confidence, but it really is. I mean, I have full trust in both of you guys and Kelly to fix everything that you screw up.
That's heartening.
But no, it's tough for me. I have such a control freak. I've never done that. And you guys last week suggested doing this. And so I had to do a lot of self-talk and self-reflection and know that you're probably better at this job than I am. You're certainly capable of making a podcast without me being in the room. So there you go. We'll find out if that's true.
Some advice from Teresa: make sure your phone pings somewhere in case you need an alibi.
Oh, very smart. Yeah, I'll make sure it pings in the state that I'm going to be in. My assignment is in Montana, so I'll make sure that I get a ping in Missoula before I disappear into no cell service.
Perfect.
And then another ping when I come back to Missoula.
Great.
And hopefully nothing happens in between there. With that being said, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I don't think we have any other housekeeping. We've got a bunch of questions from listeners about this week's episode. I want to hear your guys' thoughts. I'll start with Zach. Zach, what did you think about the interview or this episode? We covered a lot of ground.
So first off, I'm really happy that you did kind of bring up that 30,000 foot view.
Finally.
I know for one.
Sorry. Anywho.
We want to start that take all over.
Well, I know where I was going, so I was just waiting for the giggling. I felt like I really needed that reminder of kind of how this process works. And I think a lot of listeners did too. So I'm happy you did that for all of us. And there's really, this episode was a lot. I mean, you had several issues, or you had several topics to kind of break down. Christian's police interview was a big one for me. There were some things in there that I kind of led. I mean, you alluded to it, that he's either a phenomenal liar or he has no clue what's happening.
Right.
And so I'm really happy that we got into that. I know that was kind of an issue. You weren't able to actually play the interview.
I don't have the interview. A couple people were asking, like, okay. I don't have a playable audio file, and that was kind of the delay there. So all I have is the transcript also.
So hearing that transcript and kind of hearing him talk about a few different things, and I think there's some questions about it, so I won't go in too deep, but I was really happy to hear that. And I know that there was another thing that I wanted to bring up that I actually saw that wasn't in the episode, but a listener posted it. Listener Kristen Hunter made a post about Becky's risk factors. You know, we've kind of discussed the idea of why Becky is kind of alluded to as the primary person instead of John or Vicky. And we've always kind of like bounced around saying, well, we don't really know, but this post, Kristen's post, really broke down, and she had 11 solid points saying all these different risk factors. That really kind of does bring me back to maybe Becky really is the.
Yeah, it's so hard to say at this point. And I've seen, not a lot, but I've seen some feedback where people saying, well, I don't think that Becky was the target. So, you know, let's move on. But, you know, as I mentioned in this week's episode, like we can't, there's all this information, there's all this investigative work and all these interviews and everything from the teenage kind of circle of friends surrounding Becky. Like, even if we think, the thing is, we don't know, right? So even if we think, say, Vicky was the target, well, that doesn't mean because we think that we can just, to do a proper investigation, we just go, okay, well then let's just clear and ignore all of the teenage suspects or that circle of friends. Like, these are, as I mentioned in the episode, it's part of the process. We have to go through it, if for no other reason to clear them. But I think each week, at least for me, we're getting a clearer picture of what was going on, much more clear than we had when we began.
And you know, after watching it, or you know, after reading the post, I cannot say that Becky is the target, but I can understand why police went that way. And Janet had a really good breakdown in our Patreon before this about how we can honestly see why the police kind of went this direction.
Yeah,
because of all these risk factors.
Yeah, and she had so much more exposure. There was so much. She was out and about. You know, I'll let you articulate that, Janet, how you'd said it. But you know, she had a lot more exposure for them to work with.
Right. Well, too, and I think you mentioned this in the Patreon too, Bob, is that, you know, like you said, we're getting information about John and Vicky that at this point we don't seem to have gotten from the cops from elsewhere. Maybe that is forthcoming, but because we're on Becky, we're still getting these. They're sort of getting some big picture stuff, just hearing from her friends about the lifestyle that John and Vicky led from their perspective. And so we're still getting little tidbits here and there.
Yeah.
And
that's a really good point.
We also have someone like Jim Clemente saying, boy, I sure see why the police focused on Becky. She very well could be the target. So it's still so ambiguous. And that's why I think we're all very proud of ourselves for not using the term bifurcated the last one or two follow-ups. But here, bringing it back up again. You know, you said, you know, while the crime scene may suggest one thing, there's still so many questions. And, you know, nobody's kind of come to a hard and fast decision about that. So into it we go continually.
Yeah, and you make a really good point that through this process we are learning little things. Like, if you're paying attention, you know, like Javier's saying, and we're gonna talk about this a little bit from a listener question coming up, but like Javier's saying, oh, Vicky was always down on a computer playing a computer game, and we've heard about John sometimes smoking pot in the garage with the kid. Like, we're getting information about John and Vicky because all we have from John and Vicky are from John's ex-wife and, you know, his coworkers that, you know, gave us kind of their view of what their lives looked like. And we don't have a whole lot of other information. Yeah. So
didn't Javi even say, like, Vicky didn't even go down to the store? Like, Becky would need to be the one who would pick something up while she was down there. You know, those little things are getting dropped in.
Yeah. would that be? Did you have anything about the episode in particular you wanted to talk about before we get into listener questions?
No, I agree with everything Zach said, and I think we have a really great listener comment to kind of kick things off that supports what you were saying, Zach, about getting that 30,000 or 20,000 foot view. It's from Emily, who says, "Not a question, but feedback in caps. Thank you for including a summary of the full case at the beginning of the episode. I'm not a new listener. I've been listening since the Serial Dynasty days, so I know how the investigations work, but I admit that this season I've been feeling very engaged, yet also a little lost. I've not read any articles or seen any TV specials about the case. I really appreciate the overview and now have even more questions about how these guys were convicted because nothing is adding up. I look forward to hearing more details about how the trial played out." And I felt the same, I loved hearing, in past seasons, you have kind of given a little bit more of an overview at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know I was missing it until we got it in this episode, but then I really loved having that full picture. So I thought it was terrific. I'm really glad you did, and I'm glad the listener suggested it.
Yeah, and several did, and I'm so that was like an editorial choice that I made, a production choice that I made years ago, like going back all the way to the West Memphis 3 season 5, where I used to start the season with, this is a story about this person who was wrongfully convicted, when in fact we hadn't really investigated yet. And I got to a point where I was like, I feel like that's, maybe that lets some bias creep in with me, maybe it lets it creep in with some of the listeners. So instead, let's look at this as an investigation where we just wipe everything out, start from the very beginning, and do an investigation and see where it lands, and see if it lands at the same place the police got there. But I forget sometimes, as I'm engrossed in 50, 60 hours a week working, investigating all these angles, that as a listener it can be frustrating because you don't know what is happening and where we're going. So that was hopefully you guys, I am listening to feedback. Sometimes it's always hard to please everybody, but that was one that there were enough people that said, hey, yeah, this is getting a little confusing, but I thought it was worth addressing, so I'm glad that it helped.
There's one thing I want to bring up that you talked about in the overview that we don't have to talk about a lot today, but is the idea of that informant. I didn't realize that there was an informant that happened to work with Robert and Christian that kind of came forward at some point.
That was
it sounds like
shock to me.
Yeah, I had no clue. And it sounds like they tried to break down his credibility. And there's a lot of questions I have about that. I know that's not the purpose of today's episode.
Yeah.
But that's one thing that struck me out of this episode that I didn't realize.
Yeah, we're going to do a whole episode on Jeremy Witt. And so the basics of it, to be honest, I don't even know for sure if he worked with Robert and Christian. I think that he definitely worked at the park, and he worked there after they were gone with like friends of theirs that still worked there. And it was like his testimony was something to the extent of overheard somebody talking about something that Robert or Christian had said. I said it was a lot of that kind of softball girls from the West Memphis 3 type of deal. But the whole process with him, I mean, this is like years later, there's an anonymous call to police. They don't know who it is. And then they end up like talking to this guy, Jeremy Witt, about something else, and discover, because they recognized his voice or something, that to be honest with you, I think there's a chance that it wasn't even him that made the anonymous call, that they just were like, well, here now we have a real human we can put on the stand, so now you be him. And then when they get to trial, the biggest shit show at trial was he testified, I think it was for the grand jury, which is, there's no cross-examination, there's none of that. And then at trial, they don't put him, somehow they managed to not put him on the stand at trial, but just read in his testimony. So there was never any cross-examination. So there was, and his credibility was pretty easy to attack.
Mm-hmm.
But the defense, the only way they could do that is by putting on other witnesses that knew him to tell some stories about him.
Off topic, yet now I have this question based on what you just said. Was there ever a Crime Stoppers? Was there a reward? Was there any sort of point at which there was a reward being offered for information leading to an arrest or anything?
Oh, that's a simple question that I should know the answer to, and I did at one point. I'm 90% sure. Yeah, there was a reward. I'm not right off the top of my head, as you kind of threw me for a loop there. I don't remember particularly if it was Crime Stoppers or if there was one, or because I feel like I remember like looking into if Jeremy Witt got a reward. and not being able to find that out. But I guess my answer to that for right now is I don't know. I have to look that up.
Yeah, fair enough.
I don't remember.
I'm curious to see what he has to say if that implicates them. That's really what I want to know. So I want to keep that noted to myself moving forward.
What was that again?
That I want to know what he says that implicates them.
Yeah, it was.
So like I said, I want to put a pin in that.
Yeah, because we're going to dig deeply into it. But essentially, that's what it was he overheard a conversation with someone that knew Robert and Christian, and overheard them say something that Robert or Christian told them. That it was something like that. It was like double hearsay.
And YouTube is telling us right now that there was a reward.
Exactly right. Yeah,
$100,000 reward.
I think it was a 50. Well,
that's right, because it was the billboards.
Yeah,
there was billboards put up. Yeah, sorry, I just had a complete
and there was one
brain
for
fart on that.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
wonderful. Okay, you guys good to move on to another listener question?
Yeah.
Okay. For some of you, this may be a familiar name. Shout out to Ginger Fiola, who says, I find it odd that Robert, who was interviewed on this is pertaining to Christian's interview. I find it odd that Robert, who was interviewed on 9/18, says Javi told him a female was found in a wheelbarrow, and then Christian, who was interviewed 10 days later, and says one of them was left in a dumpster or something. Surely it would have been out at this point that it was a wheelbarrow, or Robert would have told him. Sounds like Christian is trying to be vague and not share what he actually knows.
Well, that comes down to it's one of two things. One school of thought is these guys are pretty criminally sophisticated and have thought, I'm going to intentionally get some details wrong when I talk to the police to try to throw them off course. I don't particularly subscribe to that with any of these teenagers doing that. Or another view of that is that this was the details that Christian didn't know the details of it, and the tie-in between him and Robert together supposedly being a part of this, it sort of breaks that apart, doesn't it? Because it seems like whatever the conversation was, so Robert hears from Javier about the body in the wheelbarrow, he relays that to Christian, and then Christian doesn't, like, he's so disconnected from it that he doesn't remember that it was a wheelbarrow, that it was something, there was something, it was a wheelbarrow, it was a dumpster, whatever it was. So the way I read it, if you take it at face value, was that this, the information, it's a game of telephone. It goes from Javier to Robert, from Robert to Christian, who's doesn't really know Becky that well, has never been up there. If he didn't have anything to do with this, didn't commit the particulars of it being a wheelbarrow to his memory. It just seems to me on face value as though it just wasn't that wasn't an important detail to him. He wasn't really paying attention to it. But the other side of that would be if he was just very smartly throwing in a little thing in there that he gives all this accurate information, but that one detail he doesn't know and gets wrong.
Well, Valeria also just mentioned in the chat. Oh, sorry, Zach. Let me just shout her out real quick. Well, she did mention, because I thought about this too when I read this question, that didn't the police officer say, like, wait, where'd you hear that wheelbarrow thing? Well, why don't you, don't go talking about that wheelbarrow thing. That's not, you know what I mean? Which, I know everybody talks, but if there's one thing that actually probably would keep me quiet, it would be I'm being what feels like interrogated by a cop and they tell me not to talk about the wheelbarrow. I probably genuinely wouldn't talk about the wheelbarrow because I'd be like, I don't want to get on this guy's worst side. So that's a possibility.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because that was that whole conversation at the end where he says, some of this is rumor, and that's where we hear Robert in the background. From what I heard was him saying, wait, so was the wheelbarrow, was that not true? Was that not accurate? That whole piece of it. So yeah, that's a good point. He was told not to say anything with the wheelbarrow. What were you about to say, Zach?
Well, what I was going to say, and I'm not trying to defend Christian, is there are times that people just make mistakes talking. You don't understand how many mistakes are, like I just said, you don't understand how many mistakes are made just in a normal conversation until you see it transcribed or until you hear it recorded. There's so many times that, like, you and I would be talking and I will say something that's completely wrong, but you take it right because you understand where I'm going. But if you were to see it transcribed, it wouldn't make any sense.
Right.
So while I'm not trying to defend Christian, that could just be an honest mistake that he said dumpster, or thinking wheelbarrow, or thinking
well, just the way he said it, he said that one of the bodies was like in a dumpster or something, I think is how he put it. Like I said, again, certainly there is a much more nefarious analysis of that. If it's, well, he's very sneakily acting like he doesn't know something that he really knows. But like, if I was just reading that at face value, reading through, it's like, okay, that tells me that this was not significant to Christian. The fact that the murders happened and all that, but like a detail like where a body wasn't important to him, because he just didn't, it didn't matter to him, those details. And it makes sense in that like game of telephone, that as it gets passed, from someone to Javier, from Javier to Robert, from Robert to Christian, and then Christian to the cop, that somehow the details of it get mixed up, would to me is on its face is an indicator that that Christian doesn't know what happened. And we already heard I'll say this, they both would have to be pretty damn good liars and actors to pull this off. Like Robert's reaction when we pulled up and listened to that audio of the conversation about the wheelbarrow, when he's asking the cop, wait, was that, so that's not true? There wasn't, it really wasn't. I'll say that I will say I believed him. I bought that. It seemed to me that Robert genuinely didn't know that detail. And when I read this with Christian, it seemed to me that he genuinely didn't know that detail. And it makes sense to me why he wouldn't if he wasn't involved.
Right.
But I'm not going to throw away the idea that both of them could be really smart and criminally sophisticated, and know that if I just throw in this one little wrong detail, then maybe that'll help me.
Right. Just a quick shout out to Montana in the chat, who says, at some point, I'd love to hear an assessment on why the investigation was bungled so badly. We aren't dealing with police indifference to a victim of color, so why were they less than thorough? I think that could be a whole episode right down the line after we've really, when we've wrapped up everything that the police covered, to just kind of do, a revisit of here's what could have been looked at, here's what wasn't, and, how did this all go down?
Yeah. And I think that, at least where we're at right now, what it seems to me is it's just a case of tunnel vision. That I think there was, it's a weird scene. I hesitate. I know I'm hard on cops a lot of times when they do a bad job, but I hesitate to even use the word incompetence. But they did not do a good job of documenting this crime scene. But it's also a very odd, strange, one of a kind scene. So incompetence even seems strong there. But I think from the beginning, they made some missteps. And then, because Becky was in the wheelbarrow, I think that they assume, okay, well, she's the target. Because if you look, they did a very thorough job of looking into her whole circle of friends. But the entire focus, and to me, that was one of the red flags.
For work. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say one big mistake was they didn't talk to anybody at her work, which was insane that they didn't do that. So that was definitely a mistake. But they talked to all these friends. And I kind of lost my train of thought there. What was I going to say?
Missteps.
I'll come back to it.
Missteps.
Yeah, they made the missteps at the beginning. And I was going to say is one of the reasons that I thought this case was a good case to take, because you see these, 100 hours or whatever of interviews with all these people, all surrounding Becky, and all of the investigation is based around Becky being the main victim. And they couldn't, they managed to get an arrest 10 years later on an incredibly weak case. One of my first thoughts was, well, they probably were focused on the wrong person. If they had, maybe if you put that much effort into one victim, you'd think pretty quickly it would, a suspect would arise out of that if you're doing a thorough job. But because they weren't looking into, and it's nothing, people are like, well, we want to talk more about John and Vicky that's tough to do because the police didn't do that.
Right.
So we don't have that in the file. So we're trying to parse out things from these other interviews to give us direction to go for John and Vicky. But yeah, that was just one of the things that got me, was like, well, if all the effort was put into Becky as the target led to a 10-year cold case, maybe Becky wasn't the target.
Yeah. And Becky and Montana just reminds us as well about all of those contents of Becky's car, where if they were so focused on her, the fact that most of that wasn't even admitted into evidence is not a great.
And that's what I mean by the missteps at the beginning, where they should have been gathering evidence and things. They left stuff they should have taken. They didn't document things well, not documenting the path from the house to the body. Not, they should have. Once it was pretty obvious the house was burned down and the police, the house was not savable, it should have been blocked off, only critical personnel in there, and they should have been taking photos of every inch of that ground around there once the crime scene moved outside. They didn't do that.
Let's go on to Amanda's question. She says, do we have any interviews with the employee of the gas station or videos? I'd be very surprised if 2 teens who just murdered 3 people walked into a gas station immediately after and acted totally normal. Not to mention their clothes would likely be dirty, smell of gas, smoke, etc.
Yeah, no, they didn't. I believe they eventually went to the gas station and wanted to get security footage, but it was like 2 weeks later after Robert told them. Remember, Robert tells them that next day at around this time, after we left and we left playing paintball or whatever, we went to the AM/PM. Christian got gas, I got chapstick, and then we left. So it tells me like they weren't. I don't think they were I think they were really looking at Javier more at the beginning than Robert. I think I don't know, because I don't know, like they should have that the next step should have been, okay, right now I'm going to go to that gas station and see if I can verify that, so we'll have some hard timestamp on something so we know where you were when you were there and what direction you came from. And when they got there were security cameras, there was footage, but it was like after a week they tape over them or they're deleted, and so it was too late. They missed all the security footage.
Okay. Rebecca also says, wouldn't they smell like smoke or gasoline? No one reports any unusual odor. The timeline is very tight to account for a change of clothes.
That's hard to say. We always think of these crimes because I've heard, and I think the previous question too said they would be really dirty, and it's like it's not necessarily true. Especially if what happened is what I think happened, which is the attacks take place inside the house. Becky is either upstairs or walks in and interrupts them. The outside space is just literally like if they chased her out to the wheelbarrow, kill her, put her in the wheelbarrow. They're not getting dirty. As far as the gasoline and smoke, you wouldn't really smell like gasoline unless you spilled gasoline on yourself while you were doing it. And as far as the smoke goes, if you pour a pile of gasoline and flip a match at it from a distance and back out of the house, I don't think necessarily they're going to be like covered in soot and smoke and gas and dirty. I don't know that that's the case. It could have been. They could have smelled like gas. I particularly am not able to put gas into anything ever out of a can without getting gas all over my shoes and clothing.
I can't pump gas at the gas station without getting gas on myself. So.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing that I think about along those lines too is you have to be very unusual for somebody to remember some of that. Like if they just come in a little dirty, I don't feel like that's something that's going to stand out in someone's head. Yeah. I mean, you have to be unusually dirty for them to notice.
But with, you've got like Christian went after he dropped Robert off, went to Jackie, his girlfriend's house, and she's been interviewed. I've interviewed her, and it didn't seem dirty, upset, disheveled, smell bad, none of that. It was just a normal night as far as she knew.
Well, and he does talk about taking a shower before going over there.
Right.
But if they're going to play paintball, they could be dirty too.
Yeah.
Or he was all of those things and the girlfriend's covering for him. I mean, I'm sure that's what the cops, that's what you tell yourself if you like.
Well, I'm saying that he took a shower and changed kind of negates all that anyway, right?
Yeah. Sarah says, is there any outside testimony that Robert and Christian were together that night and what vehicle they were using?
No, so that's interesting because there's, as far as I know, there's not. I think Robert's mom, I don't know that she was interviewed by police, but she saw them that night. She's the one that said Robert needed to go to mass, knew they were together. His cousin when he was spoken, but no, there really isn't. Like it was just Robert saying he was with Christian saying he was with Robert. The mom, Robert's mom knew they were together. But no, there's not a lot of like other like really solid sources saying, yeah, these two were together. You see their cell phones moving in about the same direction in the same areas for at least part of the night. Before that around between 6 and 7 o'clock, 7:30 time. But no, there's really not.
Yeah. Aaron says, maybe I missed this before, but what was the law or reasoning behind Robert and Christian's team not being able to present any evidence at trial pointing towards the possibility of other suspects being responsible?
I don't know. I need to have, when we get to the trial part, I need to have like a lawyer analyze that. I know that I've interviewed Christian's trial attorney, And, that was one of the things that he was the most upset about was, and I'd asked him, what would you have done differently? And he said, I would have appealed that decision up to a higher, something to the extent of I would have appealed it up to a higher court before allowing the trial to happen, because he did not think that was reasonable. Yeah. Because it was just essentially, from what I understand, they said, the none of these people are really suspects. They all have been cleared by police, and therefore you're not going to raise them as suspects in front of the jury.
Right.
Which really cut their legs out from it. So it's like trying to fight air, trying to prove a negative. Like the police are saying you did this based on an extremely flimsy case. And so, a good defense is like, look, if you think this makes me look, oh, my phone was off during the time of the murder. Well, so was her ex-boyfriend.
Right.
His phone was off at the time of the murder, and she had just broke up with him. And his roommate got into a physical altercation with her 24 hours before this happened. How is that different than me? Yeah. But they weren't allowed to say any of that.
Yeah, I feel like I could listen to a whole, like a series of episodes, like a mini season about how arbitrary it often seems in different trials when judges make the decision that you can or cannot argue alternate suspects, because I don't know enough about the law to know why those things get picked at and chosen. But it feels sometimes when I hear about, because I've heard about both often enough, that I'm like, gosh, it seems like the judge is just in the mood to accept that or not. Like, it doesn't seem like there's necessarily a hard and fast rule at all when a judge says, no, I've decided that you can't present any alternate suspects. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
And it seems so prejudicial sometimes. It's hard because it just handcuffs the defense, especially in a very weak circumstantial case, because it's a great defense. I just gave that example, but if I'm just saying, well, we think Zach did this, and here's these 2 or 3 weak reasons why we think he did, and you should convict on that. It's a pretty good defense. Say, well, if it only takes 2 or 3 weak reasons, here's 2 or 3 weak reasons why he could have done it, and here's 2 or 3 weak reasons why they could have done it. So why is it him and not them? It certainly would raise reasonable doubt, you would think.
Yeah. Okay. Valeria says, hi, Valeria, I know you're here too, but here is a previous question from Valeria. A consideration about the supposed discrepancy on the car that Christian was driving that night. Robert was asked what car Christian drives, and the way he started answering was, well, he himself drives a hearse, Oldsmobile, Hertz. The whole conversation about being mistaken for a hearse. And then it sounds like he may be starting to say, but. And at that point, Leclerc interrupted him, and they never went back to clarifying. So maybe the two men were asked a different question, like what kind of car does he drive versus what was he driving that night?
That was a great catch by Valeria. I saw that question, that post, and some other listeners were discussing it and said the same thing. And I think I even mentioned the episode. As I was writing it, I thought I need to go back because there was that confusing, weird conversation about the Oldsmobile. But after she posted that, I went and looked at the transcript, and she's right, and listened to him. He doesn't say, what was Christian driving that night? He says, well, what does Christian drive? And he's like, well, he has this Oldsmobile Hertz. And it does. It sounds like he's about to say, but, and then the cop interrupts him. They have this weird conversation where is it a hearse or a Hertz or whatever? And then he moves on to another question and never comes back to it. So Robert, not just it seems like, but Robert technically never did say that Christian was driving his Oldsmobile that night. He never said that. So I was incorrect in saying that it was discrepancy. It's not. He was only asked what Christian drives. He said he has the Oldsmobile, got interrupted, and then the questions moved on. He never did say that he was driving an Olds that night.
That's a great catch.
Great catch. Keisha says, could Robert have been lying to Christian about going to Mass so he could go on the hike with Becky without Christian or Sarah finding out? But that backfired when Christian offered to go to Mass with Robert. Hike would have been a no-go then.
Yeah, it's a good point. Another listener, Richard, raised it and made a post about it on the fan page also, essentially saying that Robert wanted to go on this hike with Becky, and then Christian says, hey, let's hang out and do paintball. And he's like, oh, I would, but I have to go to Mass first, trying to blow Christian off. Mm-hmm. And then Christian's like, oh, I'll go with you. And he's like, oh, I guess I'm not going hiking because I'm going with Christian. It's certainly a possibility, but it doesn't sound like that to me, just based on what I've heard from people who knew Robert's mother, even what we hear from Christian, that mass really was going to mass on Sunday really was a big deal to Robert. I think it might have been more to appease his mom, but that was like he would try to get his boss to change his schedule so he could go in the morning. If not, he would go after he got home or whatever. So it seemed like something that he really did plan on doing. I also point out that in either one of those scenarios, it really shoots the. In order for Robert to have instead planned to go hiking with Becky, we have to think that either he was never planning on going to mass like this, but then had to because of Christian, and then he thought to if what him and Christian did was get in the car and say, all right, well, let's go up to Becky's because it's already 7:00, right? Instead, they thought to, well, let me call 411 so it's on my records to get the Sacred Heart phone number, and then actually call Sacred Heart to verify when the mass is before, you know what I mean? If the intention was just to go up to Becky's the whole time, they were like taking these steps to throw a kink into things, because otherwise what he was hoping was there was a 7:30 mass, which then gets over at 8:30, which means he couldn't be up to the mountain until 9:30, which would be by the time she's already going to work.
Right.
So like the idea of him going to mass means he's not going. If Robert's going to mass, he's not going on that hike.
Right.
So why does he take the steps to make the phone calls to the mass? It's something to think. And I know people have other alternate explanations for that, and maybe I'm giving them too much credit. But when I'm seeing it, I'm seeing like he planned on going. They weren't creating a cell phone record thinking someone's going to look at their records later. They were just planning to go to mass. That's why he called.
Yeah, so I didn't read that that didn't occur to me that these points were calling to challenge them planning to go to Becky's and then creating some sort of false narrative about the mass. I guess I hadn't thought through it that much.
Yeah. And to the point of, and the point of that question was not necessarily what I said. It was just that Robert himself wanted, because I definitely get the impression through that interview, the impression that I've got of this whole situation is that Robert is more interested in reconnecting with Becky than he wants anyone to know. And I think that, and we talked a little bit about that with Dr. Shiloh and Scott, where he gets uncomfortable. The times where he gets uncomfortable were about his contact with Becky and stuff like that. Not about that night where he was going that night, but about his contact with Becky. And I think, and this is just my personal view on it, is based on what I've read, that he was definitely more interested in talking to Becky than he's letting on. He didn't want Christian to know that, because Christian seems genuine to me, at least reading a transcript. I wish I could hear the audio, but he seems very genuine to me in the fact that Robert didn't want to go on that hike and we blew it off. And Robert told me not, he didn't say he told me not to answer the phone, but I knew he didn't answer the phone because Becky wanted to talk about that hike. But then we see the phone records, and it's not like Becky's harassing Robert. He's calling her. He contacts her first. He's calling her just as much as she's calling him. And so I think that's what was going on, is that Robert was secretly trying to reconnect some way or another with Becky and didn't want anybody to know that, whether it's because he had a girlfriend or just because, of whatever their relationship history was, doesn't want anybody to know that. But what did you guys think about that? Do you think I'm off base on that?
No.
Do you have a different read?
Well, Zach, do you want to go first? Because I feel like I'm over talking.
Well, I read those listener posts and I kind of had to agree with them that I think that maybe there's something there, that he could have been trying to play both sides of the fence, as you said, and said he was, trying to tell Christian he was going to this mass, instead, trying to get Christian to kind of blow off. But it does seem like he's still pretty interested in Becky. I don't know why that would allude to him killing her, but
right.
I still think he's pretty interested.
I agree. And I think, it's very fair for, and this kind of goes, again, I'm so often reminded of Adnan and poor Hay, but this idea of like, if it just so happens that they had not been in touch for months, and if it just so happens that he called her out of the blue, and if it just so happens she wanted him to go on a hike, and that ended up being the night she died, they're very unlucky. Robert is very unlucky That doesn't mean that's not exactly what happened. It's very interesting to me that with all of those circumstances, it's still the case. They didn't make a move on Robert and Christian earlier. That I think is very interesting and just something for us to keep in the back of our minds, because if it was that compelling, perhaps they would have moved on it sooner. But to your point, all this time passed, and then the evidence as it was described sort of seemed to change. Now, we're taking your word for that because we haven't got there in the case yet, but that's fair. And I see a little bit of chat about that in YouTube right now. That's a fair thing to keep in mind. This idea of like, wow, that's really bad timing. That is also often why I think people end up in prison, because the timing looks bad. So that's alone is enough. I don't like, I know Robert's family's probably listening to this. Please know from the bottom of my heart, I was friends with these guys. I did some shitty things as a teenager, pardon my French, but I do not like his behavior in this. I think I could go off on a whole thing about friends of mine who are Catholic who expressly would be wanting to cheat on their boyfriend or girlfriend and would go to church thinking somehow that balanced it out because they did have guilty feelings about the things they were doing. Not just Catholic. Lots of that going on in my friendships. You do a lot of stupid stuff when you're a teen. It's just a question of how far that stupid stuff goes, how you could possibly recover if you're a pretty good kid making some bad choices. Like, does that take you all the way to executing 3 people? I'm very on the fence about that. But I think it's naive to not acknowledge why that's raising flags for people. And, we have been acknowledging that and we're continuing to dig into it. But yeah, I think he totally wanted to hook up with her. I think he didn't want it to get back to Sarah. I have no idea if he also hooked up with other people when he was with Sarah. I have no idea. Again, we're teenagers. I'm not super proud of some of the stuff I did when I was a teenager.
Yeah, definitely not.
Yeah. Okay. So moving into the Sam interview, Kristen said, I thought Sam sounded genuine and could remember details because of the big sis party. Did you find him to be truthful?
Yeah, I mean, he's got no reason to lie and risk his reputation or anything like that. His memory of the night seems to be pretty consistent. I've gone back and listened to his police interview, which is pretty short, and it's pretty, I mean, the way he describes it is the way the cops try to play that game, like, well, your car was seen up there, and he kind of laughs at him. He's like, that's bullshit. There's no way my car was seen up there. I know where my car was, and I was all the way in San Diego at the time. So yeah, everything he told me sounds accurate. Certainly, I think he definitely didn't get the impression from the phone call that they had, which would have been right as him and Christian had a car packed full of guns and were heading up to Becky's house to murder her whole family. The conversation was pretty nonchalant to him, if that's what was going on.
Yeah. Ruth says, in reference to turning the cell phones off, addressed in Sam's interview, in the before times, love that reference. In the before times, this was so true with roaming. Also, if you're going to go in and out of roaming, it wouldn't be worth the cost of accidentally answering a call. So I'd turn mine off to avoid that charge. I'd also shut off my phone when I'd get close to going over my minutes and check my voicemail from a landline or use a friend's phone with mobile-to-mobile minutes. So appreciate Ruth's post. So appreciate her reminding us all what was up then. As I've said, in my mind, I'm like, didn't I always have this exact iPhone? I have a terrible memory for that kind of thing. And everything she said here totally triggered memories of my own of, oh yeah, I absolutely wouldn't take the chance that I would have gone into roaming without realizing it and all of that stuff. So I thought this was a great post to kind of put it in context of the time.
Yeah. It was such a different time back then. It is even just when you'd answer calls, you were always your minutes and everything was always on your mind. That you weren't going to go over, or that you were at the the night and weekend time or whatever. It was just a very different time for cell phones.
One of the things that I was thinking about in Sam's interview is he talks about they are questioning him and saying his truck was there, and then you asked if they said, "Oh, is it the truck that ran off the red truck that ran the fire truck off the road?" He said, no, they never said that. They just said my truck was there.
Right.
At the scene,
I wonder if that alludes to any of another vehicle being there that could resemble his truck.
I haven't seen anything in the police file that indicates that there was another vehicle other than the red truck.
Okay.
It seemed to me that they were just playing the same game they were playing with Javier, well, why
if
would
I
people
told
have
you your
said,
vehicle? Yeah.
yeah, what if I told you someone up there said they saw your vehicle up there?
Well, if they didn't see a vehicle, how did they lead to him? Just the phone calls?
Yeah, it was just the phone calls during that time. Because again, you look at, so if these guys are supposed to be the killers, and at 7 o'clock they're heading up there again with guns, multiple guns packed in their vehicles to go do this, in the midst of that, they're talking to this guy. He must be involved.
Right.
And no, I was at college and talking to him about nonsense.
Seems pretty crazy to me. Now, how did Sam's interview come about? I mean, did you reach out to him? Did he reach out to you?
He reaced out to me.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, he heard the podcast, and he heard the podcast where I had said Andrew Geyer on the phone, or Gayer, and he reached out and said, "Hey, just so you know, that was me. I'm Sam Gayer. That was my dad, is Andrew, and that was me." And so I got him on. I recorded that interview a few weeks ago.
That's great. I really appreciate that, because I feel like those little tidbits really help move the case along when someone can reach out that knows inside. We had that happen in the Jamie Snow case, where somebody reached out about the stolen vehicle. Had nothing to do with the Jamie Snow case.
Solved the stolen vehicle case from years before.
But I think we can definitely pick things up with people kind of reaching out from that area.
And that's a big part of why we're doing what we're doing. Yeah. I'm going to pause here just for a second, not for the podcast, but just May and YouTube. Listen, you've said 1,000 times that the doc should have known that Robert lied. We've heard it. If you're going to continue blasting that all over the YouTube chat, we're going to remove you. Now we can go.
Okay. Jace, and I will say, just for the sake of being even-handed about it, I'm sure there are people who heard Sam's interview and thought, yeah, but he's one of their best friends. Of course, he's going to defend them. Of course, he's going to support them. I'm not saying that I feel that way, but I think probably there's not going to be anything super damning or revealing that comes from a friend who, absolutely feels that these guys were falsely convicted, or if he does know something, is probably not going to tell you after he reached out to you. But I thought it was a super helpful interview. Jason does want to know, did you ask Sam who Becky cheated with on Robert? Yeah, that's a tough sentence, but it makes sense. I just said it. Yeah. Did you ask Sam who Becky cheated with on Robert? Is the sentence.
I didn't, because I'm not even sure it happened. It whatever he says came from Robert. So we've got why they broke up. You've got one of her friends saying it was because she smoked and Robert didn't like that. And then you've got Javier saying it had to do with this pregnancy that happened. And then you've got Robert saying she cheated on him. And I just don't know. I don't know what's true and what's not true, or if it's something completely different than all that. So I just don't see any more reason to continue digging into that when it's just a ton of rumors that just keep coming up over and over again, and none of them are consistent.
Right. Fair enough. Lauren says, how many interviews have you conducted for this case so far? It was so nice to hear a recent one.
Probably a dozen or more. A lot of them I've interviewed. A lot of in the couple trips I've taken out there, I've interviewed a lot of the family members. I've interviewed Christian's attorney. You've heard Tim Summerly and Carissa Farley. I think there's more. There's more coming. More interviews like that. I've interviewed Jim Ellis's daughter, who was the friend that was very close friends with Claire and Janelle, and then she led me to, I think it was Janelle. I don't remember which one it was, but kind of when I got there, she was like, "I'm not interested in being interviewed," which is, basically she said, I heard from my dad, I told Claire, and then from there all this stuff happened, and then when I tried to talk to them, they said they didn't want to be interviewed. But there's been a lot of them, and you'll hear more of them as they come along. But the family interviews we're talking about, like how things, and I thought about playing them at the beginning, but I decided to wait on it because I don't. They're hard to listen to Robert and Christian's mom and their uncle and their wives talking about what they went through during the arrest and all that stuff. So I didn't want to play those and try to bring up all the sympathy for them when we don't know what happened yet. So I held those. You'll hear them eventually.
Yeah. And for any of us who have known anyone who's put together a podcast or a documentary or even a fictional story, the amount of work you have to do trying to figure out what order to do stuff in is so intimidating to me. I don't envy your position, Bob, because every season, I mean, anybody I know who is working with this much material is like, okay, here's the 80 different ways I could roll this out. What am I going to do? So,
yeah. And then it happens every week. Every week it's like,
exactly.
so what
Yours
subject
is even more complex.
What subject am I going to cover this week? It was such a massive case file that it just that just splits off into a million different directions all the time. And you'd like to be able to go from here to here, in a very linear way, from here to here to here, and then get to an endpoint. But it's like, okay, from here to here, but we can't lose track of this. So we need to follow that. We need to see what happens next there. And this guy in his interview mentioned this guy, so we should probably talk to him, but I don't want to lose track of where we're going with him. It's tricky. So we just so just so you guys know that it's not as easy as you might think it is, trying to figure out where to go with every episode every week.
That's so intimidating. Okay. Jennifer says, from Javi's episode, there was a mention, and this is what you brought up earlier, Bob, there was a mention of Becky's mom playing a computer game. Could it have been online gambling? Still trying to follow the money. Sorry if this was answered elsewhere.
That was a really good question. My initial thought to that was like, no, this was 2006. Then I remembered, wait a minute, like online poker. In 2005, I used to play a ton of online poker with real money. So I don't know. I don't know if that's the case, but it's something to think about. We have no indication that she was a gambler or that she did that, but I know for a fact that was a thing. I remember I used to play full tilt poker back in 2000. I was playing I remember my son was born in 2005. And I remember sitting in the hospital, like during the day of recovery, after he was born, just sitting with my wife with my laptop, sitting there playing poker online while we were just sitting around. So it was definitely a thing back then.
Yeah. Well, maybe something will turn up with that. Lynn says, was there a marijuana grow site within walking distance of the Friedli's home? Did they possibly help themselves do it, setting up a scene for revenge?
So I don't know. No one has pointed out to me, and I haven't seen anywhere in the files where, yes, in this location at this address, there was a marijuana grow site. However, in talking to Tim and talking to Carissa and other people familiar with the area, it was a place where there were lots of marijuana grows up in Pinyon Pines. People would go up there. I think we even heard Carissa say, some people were up here because they just like the peace and quiet. Some people are up here because they're growing marijuana. Some, they're cooking meth. So there, it seems like there for sure were some marijuana grows happening up there, and it's a possibility. And that's one of the and Zach mentioned earlier, the one listener that had all the list of victimology factors. And one of them was, the fact that Becky only worked 2 days a week. She had, from what we heard from several of her friends, a daily marijuana habit. We heard from, I think it was it Javier that said that she was the one that would always buy the weed.
Well, for him, I'm not sure she said she was everyone's person. I remember him saying
for him, yeah, but
he smoked
between
every
them,
day, and that she was who he got it.
So she's the one that had the contact with the dealers that was buying the marijuana. And so that that's a risk factor. She's coming into contact just by buying marijuana. She's coming into contact with criminals because that was illegal at the time. And there's a money issue. So the possible grow, I don't know. I'll say this, it opens the door to a lot of possibilities.
I would also say, of all of the things you hope a cop is not going to chase down on you, it's pot dealers back then. I don't mean to be, I'm not saying Javi would do this super intentionally, but if it's an easy lie to say, I got it from the person you can't ask anything of anymore because she's gone.
Right.
I then do not have to tell you anything about any dealers I might know. So that's a pretty easy lie to imagine a teenager telling a cop. He may have gotten his pot on his own, but he does not want to have to go, well, let me just call this guy who's doing this illegal thing who might then want to harm me for outing him as a dealer.
Right. But that right there is what makes me think like this could be a more significant risk factor. That the fact that, of course, you wouldn't want to give up a drug dealer because maybe they would harm you if you did that. And she was dealing, according to her friends, was dealing with drug dealers.
Right.
So it's just something to think about.
But I mean, breaking down, that's obviously a huge risk factor. But breaking down some of these other risks that Kristen put together, I mean, there's, in my opinion, there's definitely bigger risks on there than that.
Yeah.
So.
Caroline says, do we have Robert's text logs for Sunday? In the case stock files, it shows text message times from Robert to Becky. Would be interesting to see what text messages we are missing for Sunday that Robert made that could fill in his timeline.
No, so remember, we don't have Robert's text logs. So the only texts we have for Robert are from Becky's records. So Becky's records show when it was sent or received a text from Robert. But for some reason, we don't have Robert's text records. That was the big deal with the whole text from Marty about getting chapstick. We don't know if that happened because the text records aren't included. And I still feel that right there is what could blow this case wide open, is if, we're dealing with this incredibly tight timeline with the drive tests and stuff. I don't remember if we have a lot of questions about the drive tests. But, it's an, I guess I should get into, I don't remember any questions about that. So I'll get into that.
I was going to say, actually, I don't think we have any.
Yeah, real quick. I put a lot of weight into Andrew Nielsen's drive test. He's the listener that's a retired sheriff that did it. He sent me the video. I posted the video on my YouTube channel, on the Truth and Justice YouTube channel, so you can watch it. There's no question. He made that drive in about just under 36 minutes. Now, he went a different route than the state proposes that Robert and Christian went. He gets into town and heads out to I-10 and then takes the freeway around instead of driving up 111 to Cathedral City that way. And he was able to make that drive in 36 minutes, which we all know. I'm not going to get into again all the reasons why everything has to be absolutely perfect for that time to work, but he gets there within the amount of time. I don't buy Bodmer's test at all. And maybe Andrew or somebody can do this drive test from the country club to I said in the episode, was it Bob Hope and 111, I think?
That sounds right.
Yeah. But he says he made that drive in 5 minutes. Like every time I came down the mountain, I went that way. And there's no way that was 5 minutes.
How much ground do you have to cover right there?
I don't know the mileage, but it's a ways. Like when you cross the country, you're still up on the mountain. You still got to come all the way down the mountain, go through a light, and then come to another light at 111, which is Monterey there. Hang a left, go through several more lights, all the way up around north, all the way up to Baba. It's a ways. Like I said, I looked at Apple Maps and it showed, and I tried. So Apple Maps will factor in traffic. I think when they do. So I waited until 9:45 p.m. on that Sunday night when I plugged that in, and it showed like 9.5 minutes or 10 minutes to make that drive. And so for him to say he made it in 5 is bananas to me. But Andrews makes it possible. I do believe there's no reason to question his. But then the other thing is, why did they go to Christians at all? If Christian's just dropping Robert off, they would drive all the way past Robert's house, get up to Christian's house where Robert checks his voicemail, and then turn right around and take Robert home and drop him off at home when he gets on the phone. It seems like what's the theory of why they went to the house anyway?
Yeah. I don't know if oh, sorry, Zach, go ahead.
The only theory that makes sense to me is maybe knowing Christian's parents wouldn't be home and they needed to discard clothing, discard something. But I feel like now I'm just putting things out there.
Because we don't know that they weren't home. We know for a fact. I know for a fact his mom was home.
Okay,
she told me.
But you said a theory, and I'm just trying to put a theory out there.
Or even,
but I feel like it is a stretch.
Or even just a sort of general, oh my God, we did this. Don't keep driving. I can't get out of the car right now. We need to figure out a plan. We need to talk about this. I'm not saying, but if you're just trying to come up with something, and then he's like, let me quickly call my voicemail.
Yeah. Like let me just check my voicemail real quick.
I know.
And then call my girlfriend and we need to go back down to the gas station and go get some chapstick.
Totally. I'm just trying to imagine what somebody who wants him to be the suspect or them to be the suspects could say like, well, easy. They're freaking out about what they did. So they stay together in the car trying to come up with what they're going to do. And so nothing seems to make sense because they're doing all kinds of stuff. I don't subscribe to that. But again, I'm just trying to think of some way of explaining that helps the case.
I want to address real quick. Somebody in the chat here said that you can't grow marijuana outside in the desert. It's not true because I saw the grow operations that are going on now. Like there's marijuana plants everywhere.
Yeah.
Out there in the desert, in that like literally next door to the crime scene.
And by the way, still very much illegal, not approved by the government, even though you can grow pot in California. There are still plenty of places who are doing it illegally who will happily shoot you. Like you would think that would sort of have gone away since you can do that in California. It has not. There are absolutely still cartels growing in parts of the California desert who you do not want to accidentally stumble into that territory.
Yeah. I actually talked to someone that was growing up there about their grow because I said, is this desert? And he's like, no, you just build up these flower boxes and bring in soil and they were like, they showed me their plants outside. So it for sure can be done.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Ed says, what was the earliest report of the fire? I have seen court filings and opinions that neighbors reported it at 9:40, but no source documents.
I haven't seen source documents for that either. The closest thing to 9:40 is if they took that from the fire captain's testimony, who just estimated that it was 9:40, somewhere around there when they got the first phone calls. But that's all. There's no dispatch log of that. He just says that people called the station, said 3 phone calls came in, they got in the truck, they took off, and they were already driving on the road when the dispatch happened, which I believe happened at 9:53 is when the dispatch came in. But we don't have a solid time for when that happened because he's just saying, yeah, it was, I think, 9:40 when the phone was ringing. As someone who's lived in a firehouse and has taken those calls, I mean, you're not looking at the clock and documenting the exact time when you get a call like that.
Right. I know there was a question earlier about, was it Valeria that asking about how, would it be likely as a teenager for you to have multiple sources to get your weed? And I too am ashamed to say, just like Sarah, the short answer is yes. It's very normal.
Yeah.
It's so normal. Like, I couldn't have been less concerned. Could not have been less concerned with who heard I was looking for pot. Like, my dad was a teacher at my high school, and I still would be like, if anybody has some pot they want to sell me, I'm just want some pot. Like, I was an idiot.
And I was a goody two shoes and I've never bought pot in my life except for once from a dispensary.
All right. Well, I'm somewhere in between. So
yeah, it made me sick and I didn't like it.
Okay. Okay. And now Teresa says, gentle reminder, what is the status of the phone records? You may have more than what we've seen, and will we get a chance to see those?
Here's the trick about the phone record. One, I did check, and I'm glad that she brought that up because I said that last week that I thought that Javier was talking on the phone with Becky at the time she got the call from Robert. I went back and verified that is completely wrong. She was definitely not talking to Javier during that time on the phone. So I was wrong about that. And so it is possible, and I'd say maybe even likely that she was with him because she was using her cell phone, which meant she wasn't at home. She was down in the valley somewhere. So I have no reason to not believe what he said, that he was sitting there when Robert called at 1:30 that morning. But the thing with the phone, I can't post the phone because the phone records are just a bunch of phone numbers, and I can't post the phone numbers. So all I can do is either like redact them all, which was useless,
right,
or spend weeks going through and tracing down and recreating a document like I did for the day of, where I've replaced the numbers with the names of the people of who they are, which took me weeks just to do that day, to go through and do all that. So at some point maybe I'll do that and we'll get a better call history. But I've been through them and have brought out anything that we see as being relevant. And next week after I get back from assignment, I've got some more we're going to dig into based on an interview you're going to hear after that.
Well, if you weren't going out on assignment so much, I am totally kidding. I disagree with anyone who feels like you've gone too much. There have been so many extenuating circumstances. I tease. Valeria says, can you remind us of what dates you have phone records for each individual member or number? Can a list be uploaded to files for episode 12? That's a little bit more specific, honing in a little bit more, but does the same answer apply?
Yeah, I mean, but we don't have a lot of records. We have, I'm trying to remember, it's like Becky's are from like, there's like 2 weeks of record. There's about 2 weeks for everybody. Nobody has even a full month of phone records.
All right.
Was that the question?
Yes. We'll keep working on the phone records, I guess, is the sort of general answer. Kristen says, will we be hearing Jacob's interview soon?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that's a good spot to close on, because that is that. So as we said, this week coming up is going to be The Truth and Just Us with just Janet and Zach sans Bob, where they're going to have Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott on to address or to analyze Javier's interview, and then they'll be doing the follow-up. When I get back next week, the next interview you're going to hear is Jacob's full interview, which is super interesting, I think. So you guys will be hearing that next Sunday after I get back. So that's all coming up. It's going to be a fun week. You guys don't screw it up, okay?
No
Try our best.
No promises.
Right,
thanks, everybody, for all your great questions.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
We can stop on our audio.
I totally did it again. I waved at the camera and looked at the camera.
The wrong camera. Yeah.
Luckily, it's over the top of this camera, but
stop. And
thanks,
YouTube Live. Thank you
YouTubers.
all.
You guys are amazing.